Hello and welcome to BeamNG Drive. I'm your host, davidinark, and today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to be driving around in a couple of bus scenarios, and as we drive along, I'm going to read a short story that I wrote called A Game of Tag. It appears in a collection of short stories called Chaos of Hard Clay. We'll have a link to it down in the description. It's an anthology of post-apocalyptic fiction. So here you go. A Game of Tag by yours truly. Michael Jackson, no relation to his namesake, but named after his mother's favorite artist, sat in the window of his second-story bedroom, as he often did these days. He looked down to the lot behind the house where a group of his friends had gathered for a game of tag. The sky, mostly cloudy as it always was these days, scattered the sunlight into various shades of red and orange and purple. Though he lived in a rural town in southern Arkansas, the effects of the nation's involvement in Nuke War I left its evidence everywhere. 10 years ago, Nuke War I, so called because no one dare call it World War III, left the country, hell, most of the earth, scorched and in rubble. Turned out North Korea's missiles could reach American soil, and the United States defenses had largely been puffed up with propaganda. The country wasn't as prepared as its citizens were led to believe. By the time retaliation came about, both coasts were essentially destroyed. Turned out North Korea had allies in places most of the world thought were against the ruling regime. Guess the world was wrong about a lot of things before Nuke War I. Though the coasts were obliterated, the interiors of most continents were left intact. Well, if one can refer to poisonous air as intact. Scientists believed, and thus had always taught the lay people of the world, that fallout from such strikes would render much of the planet inhabitable. They were wrong about that. Granted, venturing outside of one's home meant battling the dust and debris floating and swirling around, but one could breathe with no observable effects. People wore coverings over their mouths, but they did not instantly die of respiratory failure or have their eyes melt when the wind blew dirt in them. No, especially in the midsection of the country, people went on living as best they could. People would come into town from time to time, looking for work, for food, for a place to live, or for people to live with. Strangers were usually met with the open end of a rifle long before any conversation took place, encouraged to move along and keep on looking. To many, the Midwest and the Mid-South had reverted back to some kind of Old West. But in this version, local folks barricaded main roads and used little-known trails for travel around. People took turns keeping guard, rationing foods and supplies, and, well, keeping the peace. For kids in town, life sucked so far as they were concerned. Gone were the days of handheld consoles and computers for gaming. They no longer had apps like Snapchat and Twitter or the other apps teens used to communicate with each other before the end of the world as they knew it. Electricity barely kept the necessities running, let alone being wasted on frivolities such as consoles and non-critical computers. The kids were relegated to reading, riding bikes, and generally staying out of the way. Schools were converted into shelters and storage facilities, leaving lots of free time for the youth of the town to cause trouble. Michael suffered with an asthmatic-like birth defect that was a struggle even before the war. Afterward, time spent outside meant painful coughing fits. Sometimes friends would come over and join him inside for games of Uno and Monopoly, but they mostly wanted to be outside. On the days he was left alone, Michael sat in the window of his bedroom, watching his friends play outside. As he looked down, James Dugan was running away from Amy Swester as she lunged out trying to catch him. Billy Rankin and Jesse Smith stood away from the action, keeping a watchful eye in case Amy suddenly decided to head in their direction. Michael smiled down at his friends. They played this game until the light in the sky turned to the shades of evening, darker blues, deep purple, and angry oranges. The town's curfew dictated that everyone not associated with local law enforcement leave the streets until morning. Michael returned to his bed and turned on the 40-watt bulb that served as the main light in his bedroom. He picked up a copy of From the Corner of His Eye by Dean Koontz. The novel was decades old, but he loved reading how the children could walk where the rain wasn't. He wished he could walk where the dust wasn't. The next afternoon, Michael watched his friends play tag in that lot again. This time, James was it, chasing the others around the lot, dodging the trash dumpster, climbing stacks of wooden pallets, and kicking other garbage strewn about. As he watched, though, he noticed something different about the game. It seemed more intense, more aggressive. The friendly tags became shoves, and the laughter turned to growls and grunts. Smiles seemed more, sinister, or so Michael believed. He thought he saw Billy try to bite Jessie. Maybe he was trying to kiss her. It was hard to tell from this angle. When the light in the sky changed, the group disbanded and Michael retreated from the window. His mother, thin from years of eating rationed food and fretting over events which she had no control, came into his room. "Michael," she said, her voice not of frailty, but of defeat and dejection, "I know you don't feel well when you go outside to play, but you should think about joining your friends tomorrow. It'll be fun." The suggestion contained no real excitement. It just came out flat and monotone. "But it hurts to go outside, Mom. You know that. Besides..." Besides what? His friends were getting meaner? His friends were trying to kiss each other or eat each other? It didn't matter. His mother had paid no attention to it. "I know it does, but you need to soak in whatever sunshine you can. Not that there's much of it going around these days." She looked at the floor, and then backed out of the room and turned down the hallway toward the stairs. Michael heard her footsteps land on each step as she trudged downstairs. The next day, Wednesday, he took a long, ragged breath as he pulled the paper mask over his mouth and nose. He grabbed an old Steelers cap that used to belong to his dad, keeping it tight against his head. The plastic band in the back had been set one size too small, ensuring it would not blow off in the swirls of wind. His dark blue jacket and his blue jeans protected his body from the pelting dirt and sticks that blasted against him from time to time. He closed his eyes, opened the back door, and stepped outside. The sun felt warm, even though there was very little of it. The winds, it seemed, had given him reprieve, and he looked around the lot. In the far corner, the large oak tree stood defiant against all that had come to it in its lifetime. Leafless, its branches were thick and sprawling. They stretched out as if to say, "Come, children, come and play on me. Build a treehouse in the foundations of my arms." Of course, there would be no treehouse. The materials to construct such a luxury sat in community storage, an old lumber yard and hardware outlet, for use by those in need after a night of severe weather. Michael stepped into the lot, tilting his head toward the sky, taking in the veil of clouds with slits like window blinds, which allowed the sun to peek through. He was only 3 when Nuke War 1 took place, but he remembered green grass growing where now there was just dirt and the different colored leaves on the tree. He remembered little from those days. After all, he was only 3. Sometimes his mind flashed with short snippets of memory. The most vivid featured his father standing behind the wheel of a boat in the water. His dad, who died shortly after the war due to his own respiratory complications, had bright red curly hair. His pale white body sported blue swim trunks with white piping down the sides. Michael pictured it as though the scene were playing out right in front of him. A gust of wind flared up and brought Michael back into the day. He sucked in a gulp of air reflexively, and he coughed, and he coughed, and he coughed, and he coughed, and coughed again. He couldn't stop. He tried an old technique of pressing his lips tightly together, forcing the cough to his nose, but he couldn't hold his mouth together. The air quickly, violently exhaled from within him. He sucked in a huge breath, making the cough even worse, and he hacked, and he wheezed, and turning, he held his heaving chest, lumbering back toward the house. His chest constricted, and he grabbed his jacket near his heart with his right hand, and he dropped to his knees as the dust and dirt and trash danced around him. He shut his eyes against it all, and he tried to scream. Nothing came out except the hoarse rasp of a person whose life was leaving quickly and most likely bringing the insides of his body with it. Michael leaned forward and put his hands out to catch himself before he hit the ground, and he started crawling slowly toward the back door, wincing with each breath as he pulled himself along. He collapsed. His face lay to one side, the mask no longer protecting it. Every breath he drew brought more dirt and dust into his mouth, his lungs. He moved his left arm and tried to get it underneath himself to raise up, but the pain in his chest was too much. The world around him closed in, blackness creeping closer and closer. Michael opened his eyes and drew a slow, measured breath. No pain. He exhaled. No pain. "Am I dead?" he asked the blurry vision before him. "Not hardly," his mother responded, almost with a smile in her voice. She came into view as his vision cleared. She was smiling, shaking her head slightly. "I thought I'd lost you. You should have been more careful out there. But you told me—" He started to speak, but she cut him off. "You have to recognize your limits. No one else can do that for you. Here." She helped him sit up, offering a glass of water she had taken from the nightstand beside his bed. "What time is it?" he asked, still a bit groggy and not quite returned to the world of the living. "It's late afternoon." She paused a moment before adding, "On Saturday." "Saturday?" Michael spat the water from his mouth. "When I went outside, it was Wednesday." His mind raced. How long had he laid there? What had occurred in the days that he'd slept? Where were his friends? Was he hungry? He thought he might be. Did he remember what had happened? He didn't know. His crazed eyes met his mother's, and for a moment she jerked back, startled by it. "Yes, you were outside for a few minutes before I walked into the kitchen and saw you on the ground. I tell you, you scared the crap out of me, Michael." She placed one hand over her heart as she said this and placed the other over Michael's. "Well, it scared the crap out of me," he said, almost laughing. And then he added as he turned his face toward the window, "I saw Dad." "Oh?" "He was driving the boat, in his shorts, no shirt. He was white." "Well, of course he was white. No, I mean pale, really pale," he said, cutting her off. His mother nodded understandingly and moved her hand to his head, where she gently stroked his hair for a moment. "I miss him, Mom. I miss—" He paused for a moment. "A lot of things. Everything." "I know, honey. I do too. Your father, life, all of it." She drew a deep breath. "But we are still alive, so we fight on." Michael thought she sounded more awake and resolute than she had been in years, though she withdrew her hand from his hair as he turned back to face her. Her lips softened into a gentle smile that made him understand just how his father must have felt when he looked at her. He smiled back. "It's so hard, Mom. If it were easy, it wouldn't be worth having. Why don't you get some rest?" She started to get up from the bed. As she did, he looked at the window again. I think I'll see what my friends are playing, he said to no one in particular. Oh, there are new kids. I almost forgot. New kids? Michael asked as he got out of bed and walked to the window. Below, his old friends had been joined by some new kids. Yeah, his mother interrupted, but they don't seem too friendly at all. In fact, I'd say your friends have taken on to a bit of mischief. They sure do like to roughhouse lately. So his mother had also noticed the same thing, and apparently it's been getting worse. Michael sat in the window, unmindful that his mother had left the room. There were 3 new kids. One was thin, skinny even. He had dusty blonde hair and wore little round eyeglasses on a long face with a high forehead. Another kid was almost nondescript. He had brown hair and cut cleanly. He wore a red and white striped shirt and blue jeans. He was about as tall as James. Then there was the fat girl. She was very round, with a matching round face, her thick black hair pulled back into 2 tight pigtails behind her head. Or were they called ponytails? He asked the window. As if in response, the girl shook her head back and forth as the ponytail swung left, then right, then left, then right. It was hypnotic in a way, and Michael found himself mesmerized by the swaying. Back and forth, left and right. Amy shrieked, breaking the trance Michael had found himself in. He shifted his gaze toward her. She was running away from the dusty-haired boy, laughing as he tried to catch her. The other kids scattered about the lot, trying to keep away from the boy that Michael had now nicknamed Dusty. Dusty chased Amy. Then he turned quickly, heading for James, who dodged aside. Amy grabbed Billy's hand, and they ran away from the pursuit, laughing the whole time. The fat girl didn't run so much as waddle from place to place. Dusty would chase her, but he slowed down as he did, as though he knew she couldn't move as quickly as the others and had adjusted his chase accordingly. Perhaps the fat girl was Dusty's sister or cousin, or maybe even girlfriend. The brown-haired boy, whom Michael had now nicknamed Ringo, after a picture of some old rock group his mother had hanging in the living room. I don't know, the Bugs or Spiders or Beatles or something. Anyway, Ringo climbed the tree and watched the action from a perch on an outstretched branch. Suddenly, Dusty changed directions again and chased after James. And just as Dusty reached out to tag James, the fat girl stepped directly into his path, knocking him onto the ground. "Hey, what'd you do that for?" James yelled at the girl as he started getting up off the ground. Dusty placed his right foot on James's shoulder and knocked him onto his back. "Hey!" James yelled again. "Quit that!" Amy stepped out from behind the dumpster, Billy close by. "Tja, what are you doing?" Billy said, stepping in front of Amy. Michael felt his heart thud. Things turned an ugly sour in the lot below. He thought about yelling out, but sat frozen, mesmerized. He thought about calling out to his mother. He thought about his dad. He thought about running downstairs and out into the lot, though he knew better than to try that. As he watched, the kid called Ringo leapt from the branch, tackling both Amy and Billy at the same time. He sat on them, pinning them to the ground. Michael scanned the lot. Where was Jessie? He suddenly realized he hadn't seen her during any of this. "Get off me!" Amy yelled, squirming underneath Ringo. "Yeah, you punk! Get off me!" Billy echoed. Ringo sat on them, smiling. James made a move to stand, and the fat girl took 2 quick steps, moving like a cheetah in a way Michael thought impossible. She darted left, then right, then landed hard on James, trapping him beneath her. She lowered his face to his. Michael thought she was going to kiss James on the lips. Instead, she widened her jaws and bit down on his nose and his mouth, then threw her head back like a lion eating a fresh kill. Blood and flesh and bits of bone covered her face. Before he could react, she leaned in and grabbed another chunk of James's face with her teeth and ripped it off. James rocked back and forth, trying to break free, trying to escape. Michael sat frozen. Amy and Billy began kicking and thrusting at the same time, trying to get Ringo to throw them off. Ringo brought up his left fist and drove it straight into Amy's face. It caved in with a loud gurgling sound. Before Billy could do anything, Ringo withdrew his hand from the cavity where Amy's face used to be and drove it into Billy's face, giving him the same makeover Amy had just received. Dusty stepped forward and got down on his hands and knees, and Ringo slid off Billy and onto Amy, their bodies still shaking, still trying to escape. Ringo leaned in just as the fat girl had and started eating Amy's face. Dusty did the same to Billy. "Mom?" Michael whispered. "Mom?" he whispered again. He couldn't make a sound any louder no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't get up and he couldn't look away. Below him, his friends were being turned into an evening snack by the other kids. The other kids who looked like any other kids. Kids he might have wanted to play with before today. Kids he might have played with before today had he not passed out. Where was Jesse? Where was his mom? He forced his right hand upward and slapped it flat and hard against the window pane. As soon as he did, Dusty looked up from his evening meal with wild, wide eyes that met Michael's. Dusty's face was smeared with blood and flesh and other bits of Billy. Michael's eyes widened in horror, and he tried to look away, but he couldn't. Suddenly, Dusty leapt off his prey and scurried on extended arms and legs, on all fours like a dog toward the house, and he smashed through the back door, and Michael heard his mother scream, and then Michael heard nothing. A Game of Tag by yours truly, David Henderson, also known as davidinark. Thanks for listening. A Game of Tag, written by David Henderson, copyright 2017 by David Henderson. A Game of Tag appears in an anthology of post-apocalyptic fiction called Chaos of Hard Clay, available from Amazon, published by BeamNG Books, edited by G. Allen Cook and Kathy Cook. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you've got any questions, problems, suggestions, or horror stories, feel free to leave those down in the comments section below. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on BeamNG Drive.